If you're here watching my channel, you can probably assume that you yourself are at some level of weebery. It's not really all that uncommon to discuss pop culture and have the term weeb show up at some point, but did you know that there's actually something like this for people of Japan, obsessed with things outside of their country? Yeah, there are actually equally odd niche obsessions with the rest of the world that have taken hold in Japan, like with the American Wild West, a fairly base choice if I do say so myself, and with a particular piece of North American literature, Anne of Green Gables. Yeah, that's right. The classic Canadian novel is actually a strange obsession of Japan's to the point of it getting not just one anime adaptation, but two. The most recent adaptation, titled quite simply Anne Shirley, is the subject of today's video. And in case you didn't pay attention in literature class in school, this is the story of a girl for whom this series is named. An orphaned red-haired girl named Anne who comes entirely by mistake to live with the aging Cuthbert siblings at their house called Green Gables on Prince Edward Island. The novelty of an anime made out of a piece of classical literature aside, Anne Shirley does still have its standout points to some degree. The biggest and most noticeable will be the very simple art style combined with a very vibrant color palette, so the visual appeal is there to some level. Not usually a point of notice for me in these kinds of things, or at least not something that ranks very high on my list of priorities, but it does lend to this being a pretty tame and generally upbeat slice of life anime. And while not entirely happy throughout the entire thing, it generally lives up to that sort of trend. What you can expect is for the first 10 episodes to be largely dominated by an 11-year-old Anne being a bit of a problem child and finding trouble in just about any way she can. From confusing alcohol for a child-friendly drink, to taking a dare too far to the point of personally injuring herself, and let's not forget the legendary crash out where she smashed a slate tablet over a guy's head for making fun of her hair. There are a lot of decent moments throughout this series that do make it a little more entertaining than you'd expect given the premise and where this all comes from. However, the focus is more on the element of Anne becoming a part of the Cuthbert home. Marilla and Matthew had originally expected to adopt a boy into their home so that Matthew would have a hand working the farm. And that creates a bit of tension between the two older siblings and the girl over the idea of whether or not they would keep Anne in the end. Spoiler alert, not so spoiler, she stays, and the two come to be very happy with their decision in the long run. While she may be a troublesome child, Anne is still far from a complete delinquent. She is a good person at heart and will do a lot of good things throughout the series, but she is very hyperactive with her imagination, which is one source of trouble, and obstinate over things that she feels personally wronged by, or just random things in general, which is the other part of the trouble that she causes. And those are really the main reasons that whatever happens to be the center of that segment of the anime happens. And because of these two things, the hyperactive imagination that causes her to be a bit over the top as a caricature, and the obstinance that really causes her to dig her heels in and be a pain to everyone around her, a lot of people did find her annoying, at least initially. But I find her more often than not to be a likable character. She's a reckless child doing childish things, and that's enough of an excuse for me to really just ignore what a lot of people seem to say was her being annoying. So it's wholesome family stuff for the most part, wrapped in a 19th century skin, set in a small town in Canada that follows the daily shenanigans of a young girl adopted into a home she was never meant to have been a part of. And that wholesome family element largely revolves around the two siblings, Matthew and Marilla, learning how to be parents and screwing up but ultimately working to make amends and try and do better every time. And they ultimately do come off as pretty good parents, or substitute parents in this case. They're always just stern enough to actually deliver some proper punishment to the disobedient child that is Anne, while also being willing to admit that they were wrong and to try and correct their mistakes and make it up to her when they unjustly punish her for things she didn't do. So the part I have ultimately enjoyed is them basically making a new happy home out of this whole situation, with the Cuthberts kind of learning how to be parents and Anne finally getting the proper home environment a child actually needs. And I'll admit, it's a decent enough series, but that's all it honestly is. While the look of it is good and the characters aren't horrible, in fact, a lot of them are decently likable in and of themselves, they're pretty tame, and that just lends this to being a decent series. It's not like you get super duper invested into anyone that's ever been in this story. The characters don't really have something that truly hooks you in or anything. There are a few good moments, but they aren't really played off of enough throughout the rest of the series that you would remember them by the next time they get mentioned comes around. So there's no real major element to it that stands out. Its sense of humor isn't exactly the kind you would hope for from a comedy, and it's had a stark lack of any real romantic elements up to this point until somewhat recently. And those are generally the things that make these sort of slice of life series really stand out. A good comedy element, a good romance element, or just generally likable and relatable characters. So it really kind of ends up being a chill series, a low-key one, but as an adaptation of a 19th century novel, it really is kind of a product of its time, and the sensibilities that produced it may not have the same weight today as they did back then. I can't really say it is a highlight of the season, save for the novelty around its creation and the odd obsession Japan has with this story. And if I had to describe it myself briefly, I'd just say that the show was interesting, but nothing exceedingly special. If that's the kind of thing you want to watch, go right ahead. But I do not really see this one getting a lot of traction here in the West.